Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today is finally the day that I am going to start to get a hold of the backlog that I have of reviews that I have to film for books that I read like months ago. So yeah, today is the first review that I have had for you in a while. Also, if you're interested in knowing some of the reviews that will come towards you in the near future, I decided that up here on the topmost shelf of my TBR card, I will always have the books that I haven't filmed reviews for yet, so that I don't forget to film reviews for them. But the series that we're gonna talk about today is currently not on this TBR card because I have them here in my hands, and today we're going to talk about the Empire Trilogy by Jenny Wirtz and Raymond E. Feist. This is an adult high fantasy trilogy from, I believe, the late 80s, so it's quite a classic adult high fantasy series rather than a modern adult high fantasy series. As trilogies are wont to do, it consists of 3 books, the first being The Daughter of the Empire, then Servant of the Empire and Mistress of the Empire. And as all of my reviews, this review will be, or most of my reviews, this review will be spoiler free. I will start by giving you a little summary of this trilogy and then go into things that I personally think are a bit more negative or that can be considered a bit more negative, and ending with things that I enjoyed about this series. And so yeah, with all of that out of the way, let me tell you what this series is about. In this series we follow our main character Mara, who at the beginning of the series is 18 and her whole life she has been trained to one day become a priestess. However, when she gets the notice that her father and her brother have died in war, she has to take over responsibility as the head of her house and has to guarantee the survival of her house as well as all the people serving her house. Because of that, she's of course drawn into the politics and the intrigues of her world and has to learn to navigate them. So overall, this is a very highly and intensely political fantasy series over a fantasy series that has a lot of, you know, big battle scenes or a lot of action. This is really mainly political fantasy and character-based fantasy as well, at least in terms of Mara's character arc and character development throughout the 3 books, where she changes a lot and where she grows up a lot. And also, this is one of those fantasy series that spans a lot of years. So she's by far no longer 18 by the end of the book. I think this might even span decades. Like, not might, I'm pretty sure this series spans at least 10 years. So now that we have the synopsis out of the way, we can get into my thoughts on the series. And I want to start with something where I'm not necessarily sure if I would call it something negative, but it's something that I just want to warn people about because I know some people prefer not to read these types of books. And that is that this series is a series written by 2 / possibly just 1 white authors that is very much not European fantasy, but that is inspired, I would say most of the elements of the world building are inspired by feudal Japan as well as Mesoamerican cultures. And so of course with series like this, there is the question of cultural appropriation within fantasy. I have talked about my thoughts on cultural appropriation within fantasy previously and why I personally find it very difficult to judge whether or not something is cultural appropriation or not. Obviously, because on the one hand cultural appropriation has a lot to do with power dynamics, in this case power dynamics within the publishing industry, and then on the other hand you obviously also have the question of how respectfully does the author handle elements that maybe aren't inspired by their own culture. You have the questions of Orientalism, of stereotyping, and so on, of coding, and. So, you know, as always with cultural appropriation, there's a lot going into it. For me personally, this is a series, as I said, from the late 80s. I tend to be a little more lenient with older fantasy series because a lot of the conversations that we are having today, while they did also exist back then, they were just not as popular isn't the right word, but you know, they weren't as commonly talked about, these topics. So I tend to be a little bit more lenient towards older fantasy series. Now, in terms of the inspirations for the series, as I said, mostly I would say it's feudal Japan. So a lot of the politics, a lot of the cultural practices are very inspired by feudal Japan. So you have things like, you know, the honorable suicide, and you have a feudal system that is very reminiscent of feudal Japan. You have warrior castes that are kind of similar to samurai. In terms of the Mesoamerican cultures, I'm not as familiar. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm very familiar with Japanese history, but you know, I have watched a lot of historical fiction anime in my time, in my youth. I had a short phase where I was quite obsessed with Japan. So there's at least some things I know about the history of Japan. But in terms of the history of Mesoamerica, while I know some things, I'm just not as familiar with it. So I can't say where exactly the elements of inspiration are there. Although I have read that there's inspirations there, and also a lot of the names are just very reminiscent of, for example, Aztec names. So that's as far as the inspirations go. I would say I didn't see anything very egregiously Orientalist within this series. But then once again, I am not someone whose heritage is those cultures, so I'm not really the person to judge whether it was well done or not. And so I just wanted to mention this aspect because I know some people just prefer not to read books by white authors that, you know, write non-European settings. Also, while I did say I did not find anything too egregiously Orientalist within the series, I would say that the second book is a little bit of an exception to that. The second book is the book that I enjoyed the least overall. I really enjoyed the first book. I did not like the second book overly much, and then I enjoyed the third book once again. But the reason, or one of the reasons why I did not enjoy the second book, is because within the second book we are introduced to a white character, or a white coded character, who comes from the parts of the universe or the worlds that are from Raymond E. Feist's series. And within that second book, while within the first book a lot of the cultural aspects, while they were also criticized sometimes, they were generally just accepted as being that culture. Within the second book, you have this new, very white-coded character, and suddenly a lot of the practices are very exoticized in the way they are described, and they are way more often described as being barbaric or horrible or whatever, and not that some of these practices aren't practices that aren't necessarily the greatest. It's just, I think you can criticize those practices in a way where you don't use the white character to, you know, give the non-white character the idea that, maybe my culture is horrible and this white person's culture seems to be so much better. And it's just always the non-white character who rethinks her own culture, rather than having the white character also realizing that, hey, maybe I can learn about this new culture that I now live in, and, you know, just whatever. I mean, it's a difficult thing because the white character is a slave within the series, so there is slavery within the series as well, and it is also criticized. But yeah, it just the way that was handled within the second book with the white and the non-white character just sometimes gave me a bit of a bad taste in my mouth, where, yeah, it just, I don't know, I did not really enjoy that overly much. And for me, the second book was really the book where a lot of the storytelling just took on some Orientalist undertones, and I just did not appreciate that. But then the second book in general, since we're already at it, it's just a book that I did not like, because when we talk about characters later on, Mara as a character, as a main character, was really, really, really interesting. I absolutely loved her. She was badass and just gorgeous, beautiful, love her. In the second book, however, she just turns into a bit of a less strong person. Like in the first book, she very much was a character who made her own decisions, who did also take the counsel of others, but who made her own decisions and who decided herself what was well done or not. Within the second book, there's this new character, as I said, this very white character, and suddenly she just takes all of his counsel and she doesn't listen to anyone else anymore. And it just, I don't know, she turns into a lovesick puppy, and I didn't like it. I thought she stopped thinking for herself a lot. And I think once again it could have been done really well, because obviously you have this new character who maybe has a different perspective on things because he doesn't come from this culture, and a lot of times different perspectives obviously help you within politics as well. So I do think it could have been well done, but the way it was done just didn't float my boat. I did not like it whatsoever. And then the last of the things I did not like was the ending. I just thought the ending of the series should have been like 3 pages before the end, and the last thing that happened just did not need to happen. So yeah, that's it for the negative things. I don't really have that many neutral things. I don't remember, to be honest, how the writing was in the series, if it was very well done or if it was one of the more, you know, writing as a tool type writings. But I guess since I can't remember the writing, it's not too memorable of a writing style. And so let's move on to the positive things. And for the positive things, I mainly have 2. The first is that this is an absolutely amazing political fantasy. This is exactly the type of political fantasy that I enjoy the most. It's a type of political fantasy that is similar in the politics, or in the way the politics are written, also to the Greenbone saga, where, you know, you have the characters making decisions and you're just sitting there biting your nails because you're so scared that this might be the wrong decision. And it's not quite as anxiety inducing as the Greenbone saga, but that's mostly also because Mara is just a very capable main character. Not that the characters in the Greenbone saga aren't capable, but the characters in the Greenbone saga are not as calculating as Mara is. They are often a bit more emotional. And I maybe should stop talking about the Greenbone saga now. If you're interested on my thoughts on the Greenbone saga though, I do have a review of it, so yeah. But anyways, the way the politics within this world is presented is very much through the lens of Mara, because she is our main POV characters, and otherwise we mostly get POV chapters from her antagonist, so you sometimes know what's going on that side. But it's mostly just Mara, and as I said, Mara is a very, very calculating main character. She does not really read her age from the very beginning. As I said, she's 18 at the beginning of the series. She does not really read like that from the beginning, because from the very beginning she knows what her purpose is and she knows what her responsibility is, and she takes that on and she takes it seriously. And so it's kind of hard to talk about the politics within the book and how it is a political fantasy separately from Mara as a character, who, by the way, has turned into one of my favorite female characters ever. She is not your sword-wielding strong female character type. She is not your not like other girls strong female character type. She is a very feminine person. She has a lot of the, you know, negative stereotypes of women, or that women are often given, in that she is very calculating and very manipulative from the very beginning. But she's also an incredibly caring and loving person. The reason why she is so calculating and so manipulative is because she wants to do everything in her power to save the people and to protect the people who are under her protection, under the protection of her house. Within this world also, as a woman, she basically has no political power, so you often have very interesting situations where, on the one hand, for political power she needs to marry. However, as soon as she marries, that means she gives up the role as head of her house to her husband, and thus loses power in the ability to protect her house and to make the decisions necessary to protect her house. And so this juxtaposition from the very beginning on leads to very interesting situations that just are incredible. And the way she manipulates her enemies and the way she wins is just, as I said, incredible. It's so well written, especially the first book, and I'm having a really hard time not getting into spoilers right now, but yeah, I just can highly recommend at least picking up the first book. I think it's also a series where, while it is a full series and the first book isn't necessarily a standalone, I think it's one of those series where you could also just read the first book, But yeah, Mara as a character is incredible. And just her on the one hand just calculating, manipulating the fuck out of everyone, and on the other hand just being really caring towards the people under her protection and the people of her family is just so good. Chef's kiss. I love it. And that is also why I said I did not particularly enjoy the second book the most, because it felt a little bit like she lost that calculating aspect to her personality. But anyway, I think that is it for my review on this series. Overall, I would say I can recommend it, especially if you're not someone who thinks overly much about cultural appropriation within adult fantasy or within fantasy in general. As I said, the negative thing really mostly is the second book that I did not overly enjoy, and the positive things are just the politics, the way the politics are written, and Mara as a character who is just chef's kiss, so good. And I just love Mara as well. Like, she is very calculating from the very beginning and also very caring from the very beginning, but I also just love her character progression throughout the 3 books, because she definitely does not end in the same spot that she started in. So yeah, with all of that said, if you have read the series, tell me your thoughts on it in the comments down below. If you have not read the series, tell me, did I make you want to pick it up, or maybe not. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one LOTI fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will be left linked down below, so go and check those out. And with all of that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!